Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Ben Gay III. Quite literally, the last protege of Napoleon Hill, Ben Gay III has been called a living legend in the sales world. After 50 plus years in professional selling, he has been the #1 salesperson in every organization in which he has worked. At age 25, he was president of what was then the world's largest direct sales network marketing company, having been personally trained by fellow sales legends J. Douglas Edwards, Dr. Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, William Penn Patrick, Zig Ziglar, and many other sales giants. One of the most famous, popular, and powerful sales trainers in the world, Ben now writes and publishes The Closers, a sales training series that is considered to be the foundation of professional selling. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Kimberly, thank you very much for having me. I've been looking forward. We booked this out farther than I'm used to, so I've been looking forward to it for a long time.
Yes, and I am so very excited to have you on, and I have a personal interest in sales, so I'm just excited to start and find out what you know and what you can teach us. But why don't we start out by you telling us a little bit about you? Where did you grow up? How did you get started? I mean, 50 years is a long time. We could be here a long time telling the story, but if you could just start out and give us the highlights, it'd be great.
Well, I was, as I told you privately, I was born in Massachusetts, so I was born a Yankee, but I was raised a Southerner by the grace of God. I was raised in Atlanta, Georgia, 2 blocks outside the front gate of East Lake Country Club, where my various wings of my family belong for almost 100 years. So the good news is a lot of my success in life has come by accident of zip code. I was raised in an area where everybody I knew virtually was successful. Chairman of the board of Coca-Cola, whoever it was at the time, chairman of the board of Home Depot, et cetera, et cetera. They all belonged to East Lake Country Club. And my father had a rule. I could go in the men's grill and listen to them talk. The only rule was I couldn't talk myself. I had to just sit there quietly, which turned out to be a blessing for them and for me. So that, and I was born into a family of salespeople and entrepreneurs, literally of my 6 aunts and uncles, my dad being the 7th child. Every single one of them owned their own business and or was a top salesperson in one of our family businesses. So I almost didn't know anything else. Jim Newman coined the term comfort zone. And my comfort zone was set high, even though I hadn't met Jim yet and wouldn't for several years. But my comfort zone was set high to the point I almost didn't understand there was another side. I was on my own, married, and living in a little ratty apartment on the corner of Peachtree and Ponce de Leon in Atlanta, right across from the Fox Theater. When I had my first encounter with, oh my God, we're broke. And we're living in this little apartment. There's something wrong here. And my comfort zone kicked in. I went to work to change that. Been in selling since I first won a Columbia bicycle, selling Krispy Kreme donuts door to door as a fundraiser. I ran my own lawn mowing business, not me mowing lawns, me supervising 20-25 kids in the growing season in Atlanta. And up to the youngest buyer at Davison's, they called it Davison so the Southerners would know the Yankees were in town. It was Macy's. I was a top salesman there and buyer, where I learned a little bit about business. And then I was putting my wife through nursing school, flat broke, which is a challenge. And working for my father, he didn't play any favorites. I got paid what a retail detail salesperson would be paid, which back then, you have to adjust it for inflation, was about $100 a week, and I'm putting my wife through nursing school. So that drove me to the want ads, which I'd never read. I looked under employment, job help wanted. There was literally nothing, Kimberly, nothing in the paper I was qualified to do. Couldn't be a secretary, couldn't type. Receptionists were all females at the time. Wasn't a psychologist. I was high school graduate barely, and so on. So I kept reading. When I got down to the end of the help wanted, it spilled over into business opportunities. I didn't know there was a business opportunity section. And one of the first ads I read said, if you know anything about marketing plans, want to make more money, dial this number. I did. Went into a payphone on Peachtree Street right outside of a Colonial grocery store. And your younger people won't know what it sounds like. Probably don't know what a payphone is or a phone booth is, but they were made out of aluminum. And when you phoned from one, it sounded like you were calling from inside a trash can. Mm-hmm. And so I began interviewing the gentleman who answered the phone. You know, I may come down and talk to you and so on, but I am Ben Gay of Brown Gay Food Brokerage Company, leaving out the part that Gay was my father, not me. And so about 4 or 5 minutes into my interview of him, he said, Mr. Gay, I'm not the man standing in a phone booth answering want ads. Where are you? And I told him, and he said, oddly enough, you're about 2 blocks from my office. Be standing in front of my desk in the next 10 minutes and I'll talk to you. If not, don't ever call this number again. And he hung up. So my business partner also worked in the food brokerage business. We went skidding down the street, up 3 floors at 1447 West Peachtree Street. Suite 300, ran in out of breath and said, hi, I'm Ben Gay. I'm here for my appointment. This lady looked at her watch to see if I'd qualified because she knew I had 10 minutes. And she says, okay, have a seat. I turned around. There was a curly-headed guy sitting there. And I said, hi, my name's Ben Gay. What's yours? And he said, Ben Gay, and then went into all the Ben Gay jokes. So I politely listened to him. And then when he finished, I said, what's your name? He said, Zig Ziglar. And I said, your name is Zig Ziglar and you're laughing at Ben Gay? What's wrong with you? And we began, he had answered the same ad I had answered. Mm-hmm. So we began a friendship then that ended when he died. And we're friendly competitors. And I always like to mention at this point that we both joined. He was 18 years older, more experienced. So he frankly started making money a little faster than I did. But in less than 2 years, I was president of the company and Zig worked for me. So I always used to love to say that when he was in earshot. You know, do I know Zig? Oh, yeah, he used to work for me. But he taught me a whole lot. That brought me into direct sales and multi-level marketing with a company called Holiday Magic Cosmetics. It was becoming a big deal. And shortly after I joined, not because I joined, just time, it was the largest direct sales MLM company in the world, bigger than Amway and Shackley combined. And through some blind luck, they were hungry for people then. Shortly thereafter, we weren't so much hungry for people, but then they were. So I moved up much faster than I should have and won a contest. First prize was a mystery prize. Second prize was a Rolls Royce. Third was a Lincoln Continental. Fourth was a Thunderbird. And then it went into steak knives after that or whatever. And I won the mystery prize, beat Zig and a whole bunch of other fine people, all who knew more than I did. I just worked harder. And they flew me to California to find out what the mystery prize was. And William Penn Patrick, the owner of the company, said, well, the mystery prize is president of the company. Now, I'd met him before. I'd done some seminars with him where basically I interviewed him. So it wasn't the first time he ever saw me. But I said, well, why is that a mystery prize? And he said, because if somebody won it that I didn't like, I would change the prize. And he said, but I like you. So you're on the fast track to be president of the company. And that was, looking back, it looked like a phone booth, but it was a rocket ship. I thought I was punching in a phone number. I was punching in a launch code. And because it was the hot place to be in the it was founded in 64. I joined in 65. Throughout the rest of the 60s and into the early 70s, it was the place to be. So it drew the top people. I didn't go looking for Og Mandino or Earl Nightingale or Dr. Napoleon Hill. They came to us. So I was sitting in a catbird seat at age 25 that I didn't really deserve to be in, but I tried to maximize it and do it justice.
Wow. So that's how you got to where you are. And then what happened after that, after you became president? You did become president of that company?
Well, just did what I was supposed to do. Early on, William Penn Patrick showed up at my door, as he frequently did with old friends. And he'd say, Ben, build a company around this guy. And using basically the same marketing plan, no matter what the product was. I formed Stay Power Motor Oil Additives for an old friend of his, same marketing plan, different corporate structure. Bob Cummings, Vitamins, you remember the old actor who was a health nut. He showed up at the door one day with Bill, and so on down the line. Forget it, we had 5 major companies before you get to the seminar companies, where we sort of began the modern human potential movement with leadership dynamics and mind dynamics. But of the product companies, we had 5 major ones, and 4 of them he brought to my door. So one day there's a knock on the door, door opens, and he's standing there with this elderly gentleman. I found out later he was 84, on a cane. And I thought, oh God, before I could even introduce myself, I said, this is an old friend of Bill's, you know, the mind races. I'm going to be made to form a multi-level marketing company around wheelchairs or walking canes or something. Boy, this is going to be a challenge. So I started around the end of the desk and went over and I said, hi, my name's Ben Gay. And before he could introduce himself, Bill Patrick said to me, like I should have known, he said, Ben, this is Dr. Napoleon Hill. I said, oh, how are you? And he said, call me Nappy. And I said, sir, I'm very sorry, but I was raised in the South and you're a doctor like you are, Kimberly. I feel sort of uncomfortable calling you Kimberly. But I said, I was raised in the South. I will never call you Nappy, I assure you. And that was the last time the words came out of my mouth while he was still alive. I would structure entire days of conversation so I wouldn't have to use his name. Because if I said Dr. Hill, then we went into a battle about Nappy. And anyway, Bill Patrick went on to say, he said, Ben, you're doing a great job, but everything comes after but is always the important part. But I suspect there are times when you're a little scared or lost and you don't want to make the long walk down the hallway. My office was in the front of the building. His was in the back, to my office, to tell me that you're afraid or lost or what have you, for fear it'll cost you your job. So, and he said, I understand that. So I've hired Dr. Hill to be and I could make up a story and say that he said mentor or coach or whatever. Those terms weren't in common use then, but to be I always say friend. It's like Rodney Dangerfield said his family had to tie a pork chop around his neck so the dog would play with him. They tied a $50,000 check around my neck so Dr. Hill would talk to me. And that's about $500,000 in today's money. So it was a good day for Dr. Hill, and followed a year later by another good day and so on. And he said, here's the deal. You can tell him anything, and it will never get to me. You can work it out or it can't be worked out. And shook my hand and left. Dr. Hill and I were standing there. So we sort of went to work. Truthfully, I didn't trust that concept of tell him anything. But over time, we haven't got time today, but over time, I did test it once in a spectacular fashion, and it didn't leak back to Bill. And if anything was going to, that would have. So I could tell Dr. Hill anything. And when he was in town, he usually stayed at our house. So I had him in the office during the day and at night and on weekends up at the house, and learned a tremendous amount from him. But I don't play Trivial Pursuit with Think and Grow Rich. I have a partner in the last Protégé, a company we've formed to take the teachings of Dr. Hill as he taught them to me and pass them on to the next generation, a concept Dr. Hill and I were working on when he died 50 years ago. But it got put on the back shelf until Mark Harris, my partner, came up to me and said, your relationship with Dr. Hill should not die with you. Half of it's already died with him. So let's do something with this. So we formed the lastprotege.com. It's just launching now after beta testing and all. And we're taking forward the things that Dr. Hill taught me. Mark Harris, if he and Dr. Hill got in a trivia contest over what Dr. Hill wrote over the years, Mark Harris would win. I've never seen anybody who knows the material backwards and forwards and so on like he does. What I know is those short, abrupt lessons that Dr. Hill taught me. I'll give you a quick example. I used to be, and still am, if I don't think about it, the crow looking distracted by the shiny object. And no matter what I was working on, and we didn't have social media and all the distractions back then that we have today, didn't have a television sitting in the office all the time and so on. So, but even then, through my secretary's door, which I generally left open, I'd see somebody go by, hey, how you doing? What's going on? I'd overhear a conversation and so on. And Dr. Hill got up one day, shut the door and said, Benjamin, we need to talk about focus. He said, you are brilliant, but your mind is everywhere. Maybe you're too brilliant. And so he gave me a lecture on focus. And from that time on, it's like when you train a dog with a cue, you don't have to go through the whole thing of why I want you to come over here and sit down and roll over and so on. All you need is the cue. And if the dog was properly trained, he runs over, sits down, rolls over, and whatever. So from that day on, one lecture only, when I would look up at an inappropriate time when I was supposed to be focused on some problem or challenge or whatever, Dr. Hill, if he was there from the other end of my conference table, would say, focus. And I go, oh, okay. Thank you. I was asking the seminar recently, name 3 things Dr. Hill taught you. Well, I could have named 50 things if I'd known they were going to ask the question. But I answered spontaneously, and it turns out, I think, very accurately. He taught me, drilled it, not that anybody taught me to be dishonest, but he beat into me integrity, number 1. 2, focus. 3, action. Take action. He'd be sitting in a meeting, and maybe it was a meeting on some new product or something, and maybe he'd been in 2 or 3 previous meetings on the same subject. Products designed, chemists is formulated it, advertising is done or ready to go. You know, the packaging is completed and so on in rough form. And I'd say, okay, well, we're going to meet again on Tuesday at 1 o'clock or something. When they left, he never corrected me, by the way, in front of other people. Criticism was private, praise was public. But when everybody left that time, he says, what more do you possibly need to know? Take action. And so we did. And that happened more than once. Like focus, he would say, mumble under his breath, action. You know, you've got it all. You're just afraid. Take action. So that's how I got in with that crowd. And then, as I said, all those other people sort of came along in the package through Holiday Magic. I met Dr. Robert Schuller, the Hour of Power Crystal Cathedral guy. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale became a buddy. Og Mandino became a good friend and inadvertently saved my life. He told me a story about suicide. He tried to attempt suicide, I think, twice. Once, the gun he wanted was in the pawn shop window for $39.99, which he said was exactly $39.99 more than I had, because he was a drunk out on a park bench at the time. And he said the second time I got my hands on a gun, different time, different place, different depression. He said, but I put the gun in my mouth and I tasted defeat. And he said, I would not be defeated. So I put the gun down, went on, and therefore we're sitting here talking today. A few years after that, Bill Patrick and I parted ways, beat each other over the head with our wallets. He wound up dead in a plane crash. I wound up losing my house, cars, and everything. And for protection, had a .357 Magnum in the house. I went and got it, went up my office, put it in my, cocked it, put it in my mouth, and I tasted, I'd never tasted a gun before. I tasted exactly what Og Mandino told me. I tasted defeat. I put the gun down, got up, started the 800 call center industry, rejuvenated my speaking career, and that's the reason you and I are talking today, thanks to Og Mandino.
Wow, that is just amazing. And I was just curious, when you were actually interacting with Dr. Napoleon Hill, what was the conversation like? Was it like a teacher-student type of conversation, or was it back and forth?
Yeah, back and forth, and a lot of silence. He was a great observer. My memories of him are looking at the top of his head. I'm off to his right, he's to my left, looking at the top of his head as he's writing. He was forever writing. He went through more legal pads, and I told him, I said, we ought to charge, we're paying you a lot of money to coach me. We ought to charge you for the legal pads you go through. Because he, once or twice a day, I'd hear him say, Marty, my secretary, Martha Conley, Marty, another legal pad, please, dear. And she'd run in with another legal pad. So we've spent 8 hours or more in the office in a day, and other than the general pleasantries, hi, how are you, doctor, or, whatever, can we get you some coffee, other than that, not a word would be exchanged. Sometimes, other times we get long conversations, but the way he decided his job was to observe what I was doing, take notes, and discuss it at the end. Or as soon as I said, never, not a word in front of anybody else other than, hi, how are you doing, so on. And then it came in short blasts. Example, J. Douglas Edwards, the great sales trainer, and somebody else, I remember there were 3 of them, came in one day for something, and they said, let us take you to lunch. And I said, sure, all right. Dr. Hill, you want to go? And he said, no, I'm fine, thank you. He had something he was working on. He was not one of the great socialites of our time. So doing small chat with a bunch of salespeople was not high on his priority list. And so we went off. I was gone 2 or 3 hours, came back. And what they had tried to do during that lunch was talk me into changing my name, because Ben Gay, the ointment, they thought was a distraction. This is coming from Zig Ziglar. Was a distraction. Gay had just started being more than happy. So they thought that was a problem, and so on. So I get back to the office. I told him I'd think about it. And Dr. Hill looks up when I walked in. He said, what'd they want? And I said, they want me to change my name. It's a distraction. He said, ignore them, and went back to whatever he was writing on. So there was a whole concept that literally could have changed my life, because Ben Gay is easy to remember. It was famous long before I got here. It's a great opening when I give a seminar. If they read the introduction properly, that I wrote. I'm a big believer in scripting. I don't leave it to chance. If they read the introduction properly, I always get a standing ovation. As they're starting to sit down, they're not settled yet. I never allow that moment of silence. As they're starting to sit down, I say, okay, let's get this Ben Gay thing out of the way. And they roar, usually, because everybody's thinking it.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have, if I changed my name to Dick Smith, I wouldn't have that opening. I wouldn't have that breakthrough. Exactly. So he was absolutely right about that. But things like focus, take action, ignore them. He was great. In fact, I asked him one time about I think an obscure passage in one of his books, and that I didn't fully understand. And I was used to working with him in 2-word lessons. And he said, I said, I don't understand this. And he looked at it a little bit, and he says, yeah, sometimes you just got to fill pages.
Oh, no.
The publisher wants 210 pages. That takes words. You got to use them up. So whatever the passage was, he didn't defend it. He admitted that he was just filling pages. He said, don't be distracted by that. Jim Rohn used to introduce, another old friend, used to introduce Think and Grow Rich to his audiences, and what a profound book it was, and how wonderful it was and all. And he said, you got to read it. He said, now ignore the crazy parts. And then he would go, and I go, how do you know what the crazy parts are? I think I stumbled on one when I asked Dr. Hill to explain that. Browning, the poet writer, one time was at a reading, was asked, you said or wrote whatever it was, what did you mean by that? And Browning looked at him for a minute, and then he said, well, when I wrote that, only God and I knew what I meant. He said, now only God knows. So Dr. Hill had a few of those pages and readily admitted it.
Awesome. And I was just curious about him saying take action. So I know sometimes we're excited and we want to take action, but we take it way ahead of when we should. And then there's other time where we're just so afraid to pull the trigger that we just sit on something. What did
Yeah.
you learn from him that kind of helped you to make that decision? Okay, here's when we're actually ready, and here's when we go.
Well, the point he was making that day and numerous other times wasn't the old take action, charge the hill without thinking about it type thing. What he was saying was, I'm sitting here. I've heard all, the packaging isn't going to change using just a product I have in mind. The packaging isn't going to change. The formulation isn't going to change. The only thing that's missing is you saying, here's the new product and telling the field about it. So why are we hesitating? If it's a bad, he wasn't advocating go forward necessarily when he'd say take action. He could have said make a decision, good or bad, let's go. You've got all the information you need. I have a tendency to be one of those fire, ready, aim people. So I check myself, but I don't check myself into paralysis. And I've learned to say no. I probably said no to a lot of good things over the year, but I didn't feel right about it. I had enough information to make a decision, but I still didn't feel right. I'm big at trusting my gut, and that usually works if you have enough information. So that's what he really meant was you've got everything you need to know. The only thing missing is your courage right now. Pull the trigger or don't. He didn't care. He never came out and let's market this. He wasn't a sales and marketing guy. It was you're just diddling around now. We don't need another meeting to discuss what we've discussed in the last 4 meetings. And he also talked about the danger of people trying, yeah, boss, this is great. He said, before they stroke you into doing something, make sure that you have the facts and you know what you want to do, because 4 more meetings from now, everyone's going to say, yeah, boss, whatever. And what you need, he and a couple of my other early mentors encouraged me, unbeknownst to each other, to always have at least one person around who would tell you the absolute truth, which sometimes included, you're crazy. That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. You're embarrassing yourself, so on. Years ago in 1967, I got a drunk driving ticket. I'm not terribly proud of that, and banged up a brand new Lincoln Continental against a guardrail, but that's luck. Could have been against oncoming traffic, but banged up a thing. And a gentleman who worked in our mail room, Harold Combs, who serviced the car, did everything. He was the guy who made the building physically work and all the other stuff we had going on. And the morning that I came in a rental car, he said, where's the Lincoln? I said, last night coming out of Tiburon, I hit a guardrail, sheared off the right-hand front corner. And he said, this is a mailroom guy. He didn't even have a title. I mean, he wasn't vice president in charge of, the mailroom guy. Said, Ben, has anyone ever told you drink too much? No one had, because they all wanted their jobs.
Yeah.
But somebody should have. My wife may have, looking back at that time, it was a different wife. She's since passed away, Marcia. I'm sure she mumbled something about it at one time or other, but I didn't pay any attention until Harold Combs, the mailroom guy, said, you drink too much. And so I quit drinking for 10 years. And when I heard Harold was dead, I started drinking beer and wine again. But much lighter. I never open a beer that I don't think Harold saying, you drink too much. So it stayed on my mind. Back then it was those drinks with umbrellas in them and that you can't pronounce. And after you have 2 or 3, you have to crawl to your car if you can find it. Those days are over.
Got it. So let's talk about what you're known for. Sales and closing. So what things did you learn from Dr. Hill that helped you when you're actually doing your closing and your sales?
Well, from Dr. Hill, not as much as you might think. Dr. Hill taught me more about life. What I learned about selling came from Zig Ziglar, among others. He was one of my early teachers. And J. Douglas Edwards, There's a book called Sales Closing Power by J. Douglas Edwards. But the truth is, I wrote it after he died. He never wrote a book. Which I stayed inside. It's not fraudulent, but it's true to his recorded seminar material and the notes I took in working with him for, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. And Tommy Hopkins, J. Douglas Edwards was trained Tommy Hopkins. He attributes his whole career to him. In my case, it wasn't that dramatic, but he taught me the fundamentals of selling. And he taught me why having scripting was terribly important. People say, oh, I don't like scripts. Well, if they've been in selling more than 30 days, they're already on a script. What we're discussing is a good script that you wrote out, practiced, and tested, or the script you drifted into out of laziness and slothfulness because you heard some person say it, and then you started saying it, and then you threw in your little changes, and you're wondering why you're not closing many sales. So we built the Holiday Magic empire with all of its related companies based on scripting. At 7:59, no matter what country, no matter what language, no matter which product, somebody stepped to the front of the room and said, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ben Gay. Whatever their name was. My name is Ben Gay. I'm a general distributor with fill in the blank. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's special meeting. They talked for 47 minutes, word for word, or we terminated their distributorships or suspended them till they got word for word. And then we ran a film that ran about 15 minutes, I think. And at the end of the film, it said, turn to the person who brought you here and ask him how you can get started in fill in the blank company. The lights came up, out came the legal pads, and they started drawing circles, looking like they just came up with it casually. But we had to have them time their start, because if they had all started at exactly the same time, you'd have 100 distributors in the room sounding like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, because they're all saying exactly the same thing. The first position is that of a holiday girl, second position is that of an organizer, and so on. And there were 6 closes. You know, you laid it out, and if they bought, in the story. If that didn't work, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. Let me tell you how well that can work. The first large crowd, I was asked to go to New York. I was still in Atlanta, and do a seminar with a bunch of the superstars, including Ern Westmore. You're not old enough to remember him, but Ern Westmore was the dean of Hollywood makeup artists. Used to appear, your mother would know, daily on the Art Linkletter show, and he would do makeovers and everything. He and his 4 brothers and their father dominated Hollywood makeup for years. Taught Lon Chaney how to do his, Mr. Westmore Sr. did, and so on. So I had lunch with him, and he said during lunch, this is your first really big performance. I'd seen 3, 4, 500 people in Atlanta on a pretty regular basis, but there's a huge difference, as you know, between 300 or 400 people in a room and 5,000 people in a room, up into the balconies. And he said, I'd like to introduce you tonight. And I said, I would be honored. I went back to the hotel room and called my mother. I said, I'm doing a speech tonight in front of 5,000 people, I'm told. And guess who's going to introduce me? And she said, who? And I said, Ern Westmore. Said, he is not. Ern Westmore is going to introduce you? You got to be serious. You got to be kidding. So anyway, my job was to give the opportunity meeting to 5,000 people. About half were distributors, half roughly were prospects. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is blah, 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 blah. So we go to the meeting. I was plotting how to get back to my room gracefully before being introduced, so I wouldn't have to go on, because I came up through the back, looked around, out at 5,000 people, except at a Georgia Tech football game. I'd never seen 5,000 people in one place, and I was panicked, literally panicked. But I was standing at the side of the stage, about 6 steps down from the platform, and I had my foot up on the stairs, so I guess the spotlight guy figured that must be who's about to come up. So he said, it's my pleasure tonight to introduce, da, da, da. And the spotlight, one of them swung over on me. You can't run off to your room with a spotlight on you.
No.
So I thought, oh God, I'm stuck. And Ern went on about what a wonderful guy I was, and he was sure that someday, he didn't know that it was already in the works, but he said, I'm sure someday he's going to be president of the company. He's just a winner. It's my pleasure to introduce to, oh, by the way, over lunch, he was eating nitroglycerin tablets like they were M&Ms. He'd apparently had several heart attacks before. He says, my pleasure to introduce to you Benjamin Franklin Gay the Third. And as the D came out of his mouth, he dropped dead on stage as if he'd been shot with an elephant gun. And by that I mean there's a look to somebody who's fainted, and there's a look, if you've ever seen it, to somebody who's dead. He fell into the dead category. So I came up on stage. There was no way out. Grabbed the microphone from his dead hand or by his foot, and said, "Is there a doctor in the house?" And did all the things you do. And somebody came forward, and somebody else called for the ambulance, and so on. When the ambulance people got there, and again, there's 5,000 people watching this. Ambulance people got there. One of them looked up at me and said, "Sir, he's dead," and confirmed the obvious. And I said, "Okay." They loaded him onto one of those Stokes litters and started wheeling him to the edge. And I thought, it's back on me. He's earned through talking. He has no more to add to this.
Yes.
So I said, ladies and gentlemen, today I had the great honor of having lunch. This is off the top of my head. Thank God, God gave me a few little words. I had lunch with him, and I asked him, knowing he had heart problems, how he would like to go. And he said, if I have to go, I want to go on stage talking about beauty and fashion. That's how I'd like to go. And I said, and so tonight, Ern got his last wish. Let's now give him his last standing ovation. They almost tore the ballroom down, screaming and yelling and all. And then I remember, like it's happening now, the flap, flap, flap of the double doors that they went through, the service doors, flap, flap, flap. And then everybody sat back down, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. He's gone. The fire people are gone, and it's back to me. And whoever was running the spotlight, I'd like to get him sometime and beat him up. It never came off of me. I mean, no matter where I went, that spotlight was on me, and I know he was just doing his job, but I'm thinking, get it off of me. So I turned to him. I thought, what do I say now? And it dawned on me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ben Gay. I'm a general distributor with Holiday Magic. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's special meeting. 47 minutes, showed the film and so on. In a crowd that size, I'm making up numbers because there's no way to really know, but roughly I would expect it to close in a group close like that, where you don't have, one-on-one eyeball pressure on them. I would have expected to close 30% of the people in the room, which was not insignificant with what today would be a $25,000 investment, and initially. And but that night we closed almost, as best I recall, 90% of the people in the room. So the emotion, I did a good job, so the whole setup was right. So I've told many people, if you want to make a lot of money in selling, what you need to do is learn how to do group presentations, and then find famous people who are willing to introduce you and die. Because the emotional impact. Ern had a good sense of humor. Wherever he is, I'm sure he's laughing at that.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. I don't think I've ever heard of a 90% conversion rate in a group sales.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. When we phoned the numbers back to California, I didn't do it, but I was in the room when it was done, up in somebody's suite. We phoned the numbers back to California. I could tell, how when you can hear what somebody else is saying based on the half of the conversation you're hearing. They didn't believe it. Literally didn't believe it, that 80-90% of 2,500 people had written checks for $2,500 and turned them in. And it was, no, sir, that's what I said. And they'd repeat the number again, and so on. Did I mention Ern Westmore died? Yeah. Well, that's the number.
Wow. So, most of us are not going to have that situation. So
hopefully.
So what's the secret to selling when you actually have to do it yourself without the help of someone famous dying?
Then it gets tough. Here's here's my little secret of selling. 85%. It's a number I made up, but again, it's one that I feel comfortable with. I've been at this a while. 85% of all the problems in selling go away when you sell a quality product or service that is competitively priced. Doesn't have to be the cheapest, but competitively priced. And you spend your day talking to qualified people, whether it's geographically, financially, spiritually, mentally, whatever, the various ways with various products and services you get qualified. But you spend your day talking to qualified people. The other 15% is a mixture of product knowledge. I've run 2 large cosmetic companies. I promise you, you know more about cosmetics than I do, because I ran those companies with a mastermind group taught to me by Dr. Hill. Mort Scott was in charge of doing the products. Stan Taylor was in charge of doing the packaging. I was the drum major. So you don't have to know a whole lot about the products, but you have to know enough to be able to communicate them. And in that 15% is you becoming, if you're not already, I know you are, but for our listeners, you becoming a person of class, quality, and substance, with the ability to tastefully project that. You don't go, hi, my name's Ben Gay. I'm a person of taste, quality, and substance. But they ought to be able to pick it up pretty quick. And then with all that, script your presentation. Let me give you an example, which is probably not a good idea to do right in the middle of an interview. I've told you numerous stories today and got lots more if you got the time, okay? Every single story I told you was word for word the same way I've told that story before. They're all scripted. Now, you might say, well, what about this? So I do this one. What about this? I do this one, and so on. But they're, in result, they're all scripted. I've learned the hard way what works and what doesn't work, and where the laughter. Let's get this Ben Gay thing out of the way, for instance, is totally scripted. It looks spontaneous. They think they're in on an inside joke. I've been saying that at the beginning of just about all of my paid speaking engagements, which numbers over 5,000. And probably 1,000 more, well, a lot more that were free in prisons and churches and so on. It's always my opening line, scripted. I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Somewhere along the way from Dr. Hill and or other people, they said, watch Hal Holbrook. Hal Holbrook does Mark Twain. And I assume I haven't read about him in a while. I hope he's still out there doing it. He memorized word for word 9.5 hours of Mark Twain material. Then he puts on his makeup, wanders out on stage, and tells the exact same short story / joke every time. And what he's really doing is checking the temperature of the audience. Where are they? For instance, the other day I was doing a seminar and I did Ben Gay, and I got a mild reaction, not the normal roar that I get. And I started looking around the audience. Well, most of the audience were in their late 20s, early 30s. Ben Gay is not the only mentholatum rub on the market now. And I used to tell a story about, did I want to name my son Ben Gay the Fourth? No, I decided it was too tough on him. We actually did. But so we named him Absorbing Junior. Well, I took that out of the act because nobody knows what Absorbing Junior is anymore. It was a competitor to Ben Gay. So anyway, it's a temperature check. And what Hal Holbrook does with that story is he sees where the audience is. Did they really come here? Are they excited to see him? Or was he a side act to something? There's a variety of reasons. And then if you can picture one of the old jukeboxes that you put your quarter in and this arm goes up and goes back and picks up a record and puts it down on the platform and plays the record you selected. Based on the reaction to his first Mark Twain joke story, he reaches back into his 9.5 hours of material, pulls out from his memory bank a record, puts it on the thing, and tells that story. Based on the reaction to that story, he reaches back and tells, no, he claims that in all the years he's been doing Mark Twain, he's never given the exact same performance twice, or even the exact same order of stories twice, because it's scripted, but the script changes based on what the audience, I would say prospects, how they've reacted. And he has 9.5 hours of material, but his show is only 2 hours, including a half-hour intermission. So he can't scratch the surface of what he knows. And yet, I saw him do a thing once that somebody had a list of Mark Twain stories, and they would call out a title enough where he knew what they were talking about. And without blinking an eye, he would go right into the script, and they'd call out another one right into the script, right at 9.5 hours of material. So that's among the many things I would do. When I sit down with somebody and I write scripts for companies, and I always test them first. If it's in-home sales, my neighbors hate to see me coming because here comes Ben Gay with a clipboard, which means he's going to either try and sell us something or at least use us as a guinea pig. and go through, frequently I don't have anything to sell them, but I want to know how they react to the script. I've seen blinds in our neighborhood close as I approached came up the driveway. Apparently they didn't have 30 minutes to listen to my greatest new idea. But you test them and you test them and you test them. And then when it works right, you said, how was I good in sales? That's how I was good in sales. And when I'm running a sales organization, that's what I demand of them. It's not a suggestion. This is what works. When you're making a lot of money with us, you had new ideas, bring them to me privately and we'll discuss them. If they're any good, we'll test them and so on. In the meantime, you can lose your job by deviating from this. I could have sworn it was right here. I handed it to somebody the other day and haven't gotten it back. Anyway, John Carr was one of our top distributors in Chicago, made a lot of money for himself and for us, and led the Chicago area council. We used to send private detectives into rooms with the script to see if they were delivering the script. And 45 years after I sent it to him, John Carr just the other day sent me a copy, he wouldn't give up the original, a copy of a letter I had sent him saying, "Dear John, although," I'm paraphrasing, but although you're one of my good friends and top distributors, I reluctantly have to tell you, your distributorship is being suspended until you get on script, which you're not doing. And on this day you said this, and on this day you said this, and so on. Glenn Turner, have you ever heard that name? Mm. Dare to Be Great, Coscott Cosmetics. He was one of our top distributors dollar-wise. He was never one of my personal favorites, but you have to acknowledge he was one of our top distributors. I flew back to Atlanta and borrowed my old office from my business partner, Jimmy Rucker, to fire Glenn Turner, because we couldn't get him on script, and he had brought down the attorneys general of North and South Carolina on us all by himself. So not only can there be, depending on your business, legalities in being on script, I'm more concerned, legalities should have been taken care of when you started, so I don't worry about those much, but the effectiveness of a proven script just shouldn't be messed with. It's, it'd be like you're running a sausage making company and you hire a guy and he comes in and he says, "Well, that's cute, but that's not the way I want to make sausage." And he starts doing something entirely different with different meats, different grinders, and so on. How long would he last? Very short period of time. That's the way I treat scripting. Not a suggestion. It's a job requirement.
Wow. And how does that work when you're doing what they call first contact call or cold calls, where you're calling people who are not expecting you to call them?
There's scripting for that also. I mean, you write a script that works. Cold calling people on the phone or even in person is not a new concept. It's been around for ever since the phone's been around. It's been around. So and if you've been in selling more than 30 days, not only are you already on a script, whether you knew it or not, you've already heard every objection you're ever going to hear. You sold one product for 30 days. You've heard them all. Now, since you've heard all the objections, wouldn't it make sense to have all the responses ready and memorized? Whatever they are. And it changed. In the Closers Part 2, my personal favorite among all the books I've written, in the Closers Part 2, in the back chapter, it's called Sales Infiltration. Starts on page 257. I don't know if you can read that or not, but that's the finest 45 pages of selling ever written by anybody. And I say that as humble as I can possibly be, because it nails it. And among the things it does, I hitchhiked on J. Douglas Edwards, who taught me early in my sales career. He said, Ben, when you have a built-in objection, bring it up first and brag about it. If you're selling Rolls Royces, for instance, and somebody comes in, British Motors in San Francisco is where we used to get ours to give away as prizes. A guy walks in, and I taught them how to say a script that was something like this. I haven't done it in a long time, but the gist of it was, hi, my name is Ben Gay, and yours, da, 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 da. And it's a pleasure to meet you. And I really mean that, because one of the joys of this business is unlike my personal circle of friends, here I get to work with people who are so successful, they can invest $350,000 in a car. So when I say it's my pleasure to meet you, I really mean it. It's scripted. And I've just brought up the one big objection with Rolls-Royce, price. So if $350,000 for a starter unit is out of your league, and you can usually tell that if their eyes dilate or they faint or if they vomit, let's find out. You got a built-in objection. Let's bring it up first and brag about it. And with sales infiltration, I clear all of those away in that we establish. And I wouldn't do this selling a tube of lipstick. It's not worth the time or trouble. But with a purchase of any substance, I say, let me run through how I like to work with you. If you want a razzle-dazzle young salesperson to come out here and wrestle you to the ground and grab your wallet and sell you a bunch of things you don't know, we've got some of those in the office, and I'll send one out here to talk to you. Here's how I like to do it. I want to work with you today, only offer you products and services that are good for you, that I personally endorse, and that will enable me to come back and deal with you more in the future and with your kids. And if God willing, if I live long enough, your grandkids. I want to become sort of a member of your family. And here's what I pledge. I will be straight with you. You be straight with me. There is nothing you can't ask me that I won't answer. And if we have that deal, there's nothing I can't ask you. Fair enough. They say fair enough, and you shake on it. Mm-hmm. That takes away a whole lot of things coming up in the future. And I promise you, I will always deal with you fairly, squarely, decently, by the rules. Fair enough. Fair enough. Shake hands again. Now, 15 minutes later, when it's time for him to make a decision, and he says he has to talk to his brother-in-law in Cleveland, who's an attorney, it gives you the license to say, with a smile on your face, we said we'd be straight with each other. I doubt you have a brother-in-law in Cleveland. I doubt he's an attorney or a CPA or whatever they've thrown up, and I doubt you're going to check with him. That was a stall. I understand that. What's making you hesitate? Mm-hmm. And he or she gave you permission to ask that question 10 or 15 minutes before. The other little secret of selling that most people don't understand is, it depends on the product or service, but most sales are made or lost in the first 10 to 15 seconds. When they look at you and their little computer-like brain sizes you up against every person they've ever met in their lives, every person that looks like you, walks like you, talks like you. If you're selling cars, for instance, you don't even have to look like anybody. I know if you're a car salesman, you're a liar, cheat, and thief. I don't mean that literally, but that's the image they have, and you've got to overcome that quickly. I was out testing a script one day with somebody in the pre-need funeral business. Buy the plot now and the tombstone and prepay even for your funeral and so on. And it's an easy sale if they'll let you in the house. It's a hard sale to get in their house because very few people want to talk about their imminent demise. But I've said to the guys who hired me, SCI, Service Corporation International, the largest people in that business in the world, I said, all right, I'm ready to test it. We were in Sacramento, California, testing it. And somebody said to me, would you mind if so-and-so, Joe Zwicky, young salesman, rides along with you? I said, no. So they said, bring him in. So he came in. I said, Joe, I've been asked to let you ride along with me and so on. Here's the one rule. Don't say a word. unless I ask you something specifically, not the client. If I ask you something specifically, and your job is to not say anything till I do, and if I do, answer it with a yes or no. I don't want your opinions on anything. Are we clear? Yes. Fair enough. Shook his hand. Fair enough. Get in the car. We go out. We make 5 calls. I think I sold all 5 of them. With one who maybe had to get financing in order. So it came back with 4 orders. I remember that. And I think we got the 5th a day or 2 later. He says to me on the way back to the office, that was so neat. It gives me encouragement and so on that I could do well in this business. But I would have learned so much more if all of your sales today hadn't been laydowns. And I said, you know. I said, what? I pulled the car over to the side of the road. What did you just say to me? Well, they were all lay down. I said, I closed those sales while you were still scratching your rear end, hoping they'd offer you a Coke. Because I came in the door to be their friend. I also understand when you pull up in front of somebody's house, if you're in that type of selling, and get out of the car, they're already watching you. Mm-hmm. They want to know if you're coming on time, et cetera. And if you get out and that's the time you decide to blow your nose in the street, you probably just lost your sale because you've identified yourself as an ungracious pig. So a friend of mine was calling on an older lady. It turned out he didn't know that, but an older lady in a big Victorian in Seattle or somewhere up that way, 3-story Victorian. And if he got the job, siding, roofing, windows, doors, it was going to be a substantial sale, probably the biggest one he ever made. He gets out of his car. He knows he could be being watched. He starts up, and the sidewalk goes past a swimming pool where there's a nice 30-year-old lady, probably, and her little kid playing around in the pool. So when he gets beside the pool, heading up to the house, the little kid splashes water on him. And Dick stopped and put down his briefcase and threw water back on her. And they got into a minor little water battle. And he laughed and picked up his briefcase, went up, and wound up being 4 or 5 minutes late to the front door, which bothered him. Opened the door. There was a lovely lady standing there, and came in, did his little presentation. And when he finished, he said, that will be, and this is years ago, this will be $65,000 or $70,000 if we do everything that you said you wanted done. She said, okay, write it up. And Dick's an old pro, but he said, my head, I think, involuntarily jerked up. There was no, can you cut this? How about this? How about this? And so on. And she laughed and she said, Dick, you're wondering why I was so easy to sell. And he said, well, yes, ma'am, I was. Mm-hmm. And she said, you see that sofa? I said, yeah. Well, I was standing on it, peeking out the blinds when you were down there talking to my daughter and my granddaughter. And I saw the way you, pardon me, story chokes me up. I saw the way you handled them. And I decided right then, if I could afford what you were selling, I'd buy. So everything you've set up here in the house really didn't make much difference.
Oh, wow.
So those are the little subtleties of selling people. I was doing a seminar one day for a bunch of automobile dealers, and in the front left-hand side, never forget, there was a group of 10 or 12 people, and they were dressed even more shabbily than the other automobile salespeople, many of whom were used car people and so on. And I noticed them. It's sort of like they'd gotten a bunch of homeless people to come in and sitting in the front. Probably wasn't that dramatic, but they were identifiable. And so I went through the thing, did a few questions and answers, and one of those guys raised his hand and said, Mr. Gay, we're having a little trouble selling our cars. And I said, what brand of car do you sell? And they said, Yugos. Again, you may not be old enough to remember, but there was a car called the Yugo. It was the least expensive car sold in the United States, adjusted for inflation, the least expensive car ever sold in the United States. And there was a reason for it. It was a rolling piece of junk. I tell people the Yugo is the one that had the rear window defroster, so your hands wouldn't get cold while you were pushing it. So I said to them, before I give you an answer to your question, the real answer to your question is I don't have a clue. Get a gun, bring them into the closing room, threaten to kill their kids if they don't buy. That ought to work. Short of that, do I have a magic phrase for selling junk, overpriced junk as low as it was, overpriced junk to unqualified people? I really don't have a magic phrase, but I do have some advice. I guarantee in this town, I just drove through it to get here, in this town are a dozen or more other automobile dealerships, Chevrolet, Ford, GMC, Lexus, whatever, VW, all of whom sell quality products. Some people like some people like the other, but they're all quality products. So here's what I would suggest you do at the close of the meeting today. Keep taking notes, but at the close of the meeting today, pardon me, I want you to go back to your office, clean out your desk, and go get a job at a reputable dealership selling something that you'd be proud to sell. And Yugo isn't it. I didn't follow up with them. None of them had any money to pay me anything. But I heard through the grapevine that all of them went back to the Yugo dealership, cleaned out their desk, and were working somewhere else within a few days.
Wow.
So that's the secret. You know, how do you sell Yugos? I don't know. You know, but why?
That makes sense. So you have been running businesses for 50 years. What has changed as far as selling from when you first started selling to now? Is there changes in how people sell?
Yeah, absolutely. Not in how they sell. Once you and I are talking, this could be 1950 or 1850, the Yankee Peddler. What you want to know is what's in it for me, and can you trust me? And do I explain my product or service well? And so on. What's changed is I always liken it to picture a herd of sheep, and you have a guy, you're the shepherd, you have a person out there helping you round up the sheep. He's got a staff and he's bumping them in the rear end and trying to get them over to the gate. And it's slow going. It was slow going when I used to invite someone to a meeting, and then if I didn't have too many people, get in my car, drive to their house, pick them up and bring them back to the hotel to make sure they'd show up. Because, you know, comes 7 o'clock and you've already worked all day long, it's awful easy to talk yourself out of going to an opportunity meeting. So we used to have to round them up that way. Today we have social media and the internet and so on. So what I tell people is picture the poor assistant shepherd out in the field trying to round up all these things. And now all of a sudden you get 5 highly trained sheepdogs, border collies, whatever. They'd be over at the gate in a hurry, lined up in order, saying yes, sir, and no, sir to the dog, and march right through the gate. If we'd had social media when I was running Holiday Magic, I would now be the benevolent dictator of the world. I just can't believe how much easier things are today. It's like when we discovered making a telephone call, sometimes it was actually it was less expensive to get in your car and drive to talk to somebody than to risk a long distance call. People today don't understand that, but it was. So when telephone selling became in vogue and the phone companies started dealing with people like us, and the prices dropped, I thought it was miraculous, because instead of getting in the car, driving 20 miles, giving a 20-minute presentation, be told no, get in the car, drive back 20 miles. Now I'm talking to you on the phone, and if I have an effective script, you say no. Obviously, I would try and overcome it. That's the reason I have an 86% personal closing rate. But you say no, I can hang up and be talking to the next person in 10 or 15 seconds. So that this moves and moves and moves. And now with social media, my initial message doesn't go to just the person I drove out and talked to or phoned and talked to. It can go to 15 or 20,000 people. We're building out now thelastprotégé.com. We have a person working with us. Not all of the people are qualified, obviously. The list is segmented, so we won't waste a lot of time and money. But we have a person with 32 million names on his lists, email lists, Facebook lists, whatever. So today and now, instead of making 32,000 trips in my car or making 32,000 phone calls, I will write and test, and I've already done it, to a small group of people of a couple of introductory things, and then to whatever portion of the 32 million we want to send to, I go, send. You know, that's what's different. But the sales process is the same. I haven't learned anything new. I could say that the customer's a little better educated today, but sometimes they're miseducated, a little more educated than they were in the old days. But if you're selling a quality product that's competitively priced, that's good. It saves me 15 or 20 minutes. I don't have to convince you. You've already read the Google reviews and you know we're a 5-star whatever, and so on. So I can not skip through it, but lightly touch on it to make sure that those points have been covered and spend most of the time designing a product for you. In sales infiltration, the other thing we talk about is, in the old days, it was team A, the salesperson, versus team B, the prospective customer. Hi, how are you? Let's go to war. And I'll highball you and you lowball me, and we'll try and find a place in the middle, which is what we were going to do anyway, or not do anything. What we teach people to do is form Team C, which is owned 50-50 by the customer and salesperson. And Team C has one vested interest: solving a mutually agreed upon problem with a product or service that fits their needs. So it enables me. You want to hear my magic close? I'm like the sniper up in the tree. They say 86%. I said, yeah, but understand, in the meantime, you would have closed 10 times or tried to close 10 times where I closed once. But I've been sitting up in the tree with my telescopic sight, watching the prospects and working with them for quite some time, days, weeks, months, minutes. So when I pull the trigger, I thoroughly expect you to be hit with the logic of my idea and my magic close. So I spend my time selling to get into position to be able to deserve to expect a yes when I ask you to take action. A good sniper, a sniper who survived being a sniper, didn't start going boom, 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 boom. You give away your location doing that. You shoot once, get your kill, and go on to your next job. So that's a huge part of it. So let's assume that you've read sales infiltration. You've maneuvered yourself into a place where it's logical and justifiable for you to ask for the order. At that point, I say, this is the magic close. Based on what we've discussed, or based on what you've told me, whichever one fits the best, okay? Based on what we've discussed, here's what I suggest we do. We. What we've discussed, here's what I suggest we do. Fill in the blank. Buy the car, buy the vacuum cleaner, whatever. Fill in the blank, blah, blah, blah. Fair enough? And the answer, in my case, because I spend a lot of time getting positioned to ask that question, 86% of the time the answer is yes. There might be a few percentage points less than that, but fair enough drags out whatever else is on their mind. Yeah, but, and everything after the but is the important part. Figure out what that is and solve that. Get back up to 86%.
Wow.
But you're afraid to ask me another question because the answers are so long.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, I guess, you have so much knowledge and experience. So why don't you talk to people about what you actually offer? Like, how can they learn from you?
Well, in the sales realm, you can learn from me by buying the Closers series. Closers 1, Closers 2, there's a Closers 3 over there, but I only have 2 hands. This is the best-selling, most popular, most powerful book ever written on selling. Originally, it was just called The Closers. We sold 2 million copies before we allowed it to go into bookstores, just on word of mouth and through a distributor organization. And we sold 10 million copies when we quit counting 20 years ago. The numbers were getting fuzzy because we've been through so many different printers. I got where I didn't trust the number anymore. So we just, 10 million's enough. Very few people sell 10 million. So that's good. The Closers Part 1 is the kicks, the blocks, and the punches of selling. Selling the way it really is, not the way we wish it was. Then I wrote the Closers Part 2. Part 2 picks up where Part 1 leaves off. It shows you what sophisticated people really do with the information in part one. Cary Grant, the old actor, said the secret of acting was not to get caught at it. That's also the secret of selling. I'm not one of those grab you by the throat, wrestle you to the ground, and fight over your pocketbook type salesperson. Uh, I try and be sophisticated and be on your side and make you feel comfortable with me, form Team C together and go solve our problem together. And the way you get that, I could send you to my website, which is this is high tech, by the way. For me, this is high tech. www.bfg3.com. However, I'm going to do you a bigger favor than that. At the bottom of that, it says, is that reading backwards or can you read it?
Reading the right way.
Okay. stores.ebay.com/Ronzoni-Books, RONZONEBOOKS. And the reason I want you to go there is they have all my material, but featured with special pricing and free shipping, which we don't offer at my own website. So I'd love you to go to my website, sign up. We'll stay in touch. We don't bug you, but we'll stay in touch. Go to that if you're going to buy something, because that's the best place on the planet to get it. How is that possible that these people, stores, ebay.com, Ronzoni-Books, can offer my products for less than I do? Well, Ronzoni is my wife's maiden name. So the answer is she sneaks into the warehouse, steals books from my inventory, sells them at a discount, which she can afford to do. She didn't have any cost, and then feeds them into our shipping department where they ship them, and I pay for that too. So she's got she's got a sweet deal. And I've told people lovingly, especially new people in the warehouse, I love to mess with them. I said, there's this lady who comes in here, she'll claim to be my wife, and she tends to steal books and sell them. I want it stopped. Yes, sir. And then I leave, and I don't know what other people tell them, but she's never stopped. She's never approached. And I've seen them carrying things into our shipping department for her. So, so go to Ronzoni, eBay, blah, 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 Ronzoni-Books. And even there, it qualifies under my 100%, no questions asked, lifetime money-back guarantee, which she can afford to offer because, I repeat, she has no cost. Yeah. So that's how I do that. And then if you want to get up to what we're doing, I've been doing this for years, to what we're now doing that Dr. Hill and I planned to do 50 years ago, but his death interrupted us, and I never got back to it. Go to the last, all one word, of course, the last protégé. If you're like me and didn't know how to spell protégé, it's Protege. When we came up with the name, I had to look it up in the dictionary, make sure I spelled it right. thelastprotege.com. Nothing required. Just go there, put in your name and your email, and we'll show you what we're doing now to bring Dr. Hill's teachings to the modern age.
And just changing gears a little here. So just going back to you personally, what in your life has given you the most happiness, the most joy, the most fulfillment?
Gigi. Gigi is the love of my life. Took me 3 times, no offense to the other ladies, but it took me 3 times to get it right. And I've been eyeing her since the day I met her 43 years ago. First weekend we were up here. My former wife and I, she's passed now, she was a little rattled about having lost all our money and why wasn't I going to get a job instead of start a new industry. Some people are really funny about that. She said, I said, what do you want to do today? It's our first weekend in town, March of 76. She said, I want to go to church. So I said, well, find one. I didn't know any churches up here. So we went to a little Episcopal church in Placerville, California, went up the steps, was built before the gold rush, 1849 or something. Went up the steps and we were greeted by 2 lovely, beautiful ladies, Gigi Ronzoni's mother and Gigi Ronzoni. And I remember thinking at the time, not anything lustful, but I remember thinking at the time, wow, is she pretty and cute and so on. And then over the years we met. She was the world's worst waitress. Uh, so I ate a few times in restaurants where she was losing orders and everything, but she was so sweet, nobody cared. You know, she'd come out to the table with her arms stacked with plates and say, "Could you help me?" She was loaded up in the back room. She didn't do it, and couldn't unload it when she got to the table. So I would see her over the years and so on. And then one day we both came on the market simultaneously, and I made my move. And so I bagged her 23 years ago. Actually, a little before that, but in church, in the same church where I met her, we got married 23 years ago. So that's my great joy. My great professional joy is the work I've done in prisons. I started People Builders at San Quentin State Prison and helped, underlined helped, turn it from a hellhole to the place that if you're in the prison system, you try and get to, because the training for your afterlife is so much better. That's where I've seen, when I used to mow lawns in the South in the growing season, I hated to mow a lawn that didn't really need mowing, because you get to the end of the, you're a lady, so you don't know this, you probably never mowed a lawn, but you get to the end and you turn around and you can't tell what you did. You know, hopefully there's some faint wheel tracks so you can go back and not mow the same thing twice. I hated that. I liked the grass to be at least this deep, if not deeper. So when I got to the end line, looked back, I could see the results. San Quentin, that's true in any sales situation, but I've taught people to be great salespeople who are already millionaires. I have a client now who's a billionaire, spelled with a B, and he pays me to come in and work with him and his troops and so on in the investment banking business. But there's not a whole lot of, you know, what am I going to say to him? Well, that last $20,000 you added to your $1 billion was due to me. It's not rewarding, but and sometimes not identifiable. But at San Quentin and at Lompoc Federal Penitentiary and at Frontiera, the women's prison in Southern California, and lots of other places along the way, but those three mainly, when you mowed the lawn, you could see what you had done. When the guy who started your 12-week class graduates and he couldn't read when he started, but the system taught him how to read, and he had no self-confidence, but the system turned him into sometimes we had to tone them down. Glad your confidence is back. Now calm yourself. Let's not scare them. Let's make them feel comfortable with you. The work I did there was just absolutely fascinating and rewarding. I went there every Friday night at 6 o'clock and left at 6 o'clock Saturday morning, 12 hours straight, no breaks, every Friday night for 5 years. And that was probably, but what I taught there was what I teach now. Public speaking to build your confidence, sales training because nobody cared. If you can close sales, nobody cares about your background. You know, so we sort of jumped over those hurdles quickly, and self-confidence and so on. So those are my two favorites. Personal, it's Gigi Ronzoni. Nothing comes close. And in business, San Quentin was probably the people say, what's it like in San Quentin? I said, just like it is in your neighborhood. The difference is it's under more pressure, smaller space, and it happens faster. You know, so, but other than that, it's like any other society. There's the good guys, the bad guys, the people who look for trouble and the people who try and avoid trouble and so on, all aspects of society. But the first year I was at San Quentin, 56 people were killed. In your neighborhood, probably that's not true.
No. Oh, so thank you so much for being on the podcast today and all your knowledge and experience. And do you have any last words of advice for people to live a successful life?
If you're young, get serious quicker. People say, well, you started at 25. True. But I was still loosey-goosey about good times and business times and so on. I sort of rose to the top in spite of myself. And the 10 years before that, young adulthood, late teens, mid-teens, and so on, were almost wasted. Everything adds to the business experience. But I thought like Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, if you had a good handshake, a nice smile, and shine shoes, that was enough. Well, it turned out that wasn't enough. And I didn't learn that till I got suspended in Holiday Magic, just like I suspended John Carr. guy met me at the door of the Georgian Terrace Hotel. You know right where that is, on the corner of Peachtree and Ponce de Leon. Met me as I came in the door, and he said, "Ben, need to talk to you." It was the guy who recruited Zig and me into the business. I said, "What about?" And he says, "I don't want you coming to the meetings anymore." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, here's why. You never bring anybody. That depresses people. And the reason you don't bring anybody is you won't learn the script of how to invite someone to the meeting. Then you're of no help to us in the meeting because you haven't learned the opportunity meeting, the 47-minute presentation. So I can't trust you at the front of the room. And then because you're here all the time, other people, we had a system, if you couldn't close your prospect, you raised your hand and somebody more experienced would come over and help you. He said, they see you here all the time, so they assume you're making money and you hide that old ratty car you have, so they have no reason to not know you're not making any money. I parked it about a block away and walked in. And he said, so they raise their hand and you come over and blow off all their prospects. So here's the deal. You're depressing people. And I said, well, not coming to the meetings, not being in the business is not one of my options. By that time I had $5,000, $50,000 in today's money sunk in the business, and I'm making $100 a week. So we need new money, you know. And I said, that's not one of the options. How do I get back in? He said, you go home and you learn the scripts. And when you can stand in front of my desk and give the invitation script, it's called the passport, the invitation to success. When you can give the opportunity meeting, 47 minutes, when you can give the 6 closes that we do at the end of the seminar, and when you can do the post-close verbatim, I'll let you come back to the meeting. Took me about a week, I'm guessing, to do it. Stood in front of his desk, did it. Within a night or two, I showed up to the meeting with 5 people. That's 5 more than I'd brought in the previous 6 months. Closed all of them. Again, like the cemetery story, one of them I think had to go get some money, and I made more money in one presentation, must have lasted 20 minutes, beginning to end, than I was going to make all year with my father. So I became a believer.
Well, thank you so much for all your stories and just for spending your time with us. And I encourage everyone to go to your website and read your books, and especially my friends who are in sales. And I have a lot of friends in sales, so we'll be coming to see what you have to offer.
Well, we'd love to supply you with that and encourage you to read them and study them and apply them. That's sort of the secret. Apply them. And I'll sign and date all of them. Even if you buy them from creepy old Gigi Ronzoni, they bring them over to me to sign before I pay to ship them. So it will be my honor. Even though they're stolen, it'll be my honor. And I really appreciate you having me on, Kimberly. You are quite a lady.
All right. Well, thanks. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay.